Welcome to a story where the prairie holds secrets, and a photograph can change everything. Settle in as we ride into danger and discover what happens when two stubborn souls collide under the Nebraska sky. Cottonwood, Nebraska. Late summer 1887. Beatrice Mackenzie stood in the dust outside the failing ranch she had just inherited and stared at the banker's notice nailed to her door. The paper said she had 30 days to settle a debt her uncle had never mentioned, a sum so large it would take 3 successful cattle drives to clear. She pulled the notice down and crushed it in her fist, her dark auburn hair escaping its practical bun in the hot wind. She had arrived from St. Louis 2 weeks earlier expecting a modest inheritance, and found instead a skeleton crew of 3 ranch hands, a herd too small to drive to market, and bills stacked on every surface. The ranch sat at a wagon trail crossroads where settlers passed through on their way to better claims. And most mornings she woke to the sound of wheels rolling past her land toward someone else's dream. Beatrice had made her living as a traveling photographer, capturing families and storefronts and the occasional outlaw for wanted posters. But she had never expected to trade her camera for a branding iron. The cattle prices had swung wild that year, and every rancher in the territory was gambling everything on the next drive. But she did not have enough stock to make the gamble worth the risk. She walked into the ranch house and set her camera case on the table, then pulled out the ledger her uncle had kept. The numbers did not lie. Huxley Sutton, the mine owner from the ridge north of town, held the note on the ranch, and the interest had compounded every month for 2 years. Beatrice had met Sutton once, a tight-lipped man with cold eyes who watched everyone as though waiting for them to make a mistake. He owned half the claims in Cottonwood and had a reputation for buying up land when owners defaulted, then selling it at triple the price to the next desperate fool. She flipped through the ledger and found the original loan agreement, but something about the signature looked wrong. The ink was too fresh, the pen strokes too careful. She held the page up to the window and saw faint eraser marks beneath her uncle's name. Her hands went cold. Someone had forged the paperwork. Before she could think it through, the door opened, and a man stepped inside without knocking. He was tall, lean, with sandy brown hair that curled at his collar, and eyes the color of creek water under clouds. He wore a worn gray coat and a dark hat, and his boots were caked with trail dust. He carried himself like a man who had spent years in a saddle and learned to sleep with one eye open.
You Beatrice Mackenzie?
She set the ledger down and kept her hand near the drawer where she kept her uncle's revolver.
I am. Who's asking?
Name's Caleb Carson. I heard you might be hiring.
Beatrice looked him over. He had the build of a ranch hand, but the manner of someone used to giving orders. And his coat had the faded shape of Confederate insignia stitched over and hidden under a patch. She had seen enough veterans to recognize the signs. Men who had fought for the losing side often drifted west to start over, and most of them did not talk about where they had been or what they had done.
I can't pay much. Ranch is barely holding on.
I'm not asking for much. Just a roof and 3 meals. I can handle horses, cattle, and trouble.
She studied his face and saw no deception, only a quiet resolve that reminded her of men who had learned to live with hard choices.
All right. Bunkhouse is out back. Work starts at dawn.
Appreciate it.
He turned to leave, then paused at the door.
That ledger you were looking at. If you think someone's cheating you, you might want to keep that close.
Beatrice watched him walk out and felt a prickle of unease. He had seen the ledger from across the room and read the situation faster than she would have expected from a drifter looking for work. She tucked the book under her arm and decided to trust her instinct. If Caleb Carson was more than he claimed, she would find out soon enough. The next morning, she rode into town with the ledger in her saddlebag and her camera slung across her back. Cottonwood was a cluster of wooden buildings huddled around a dry goods store, a saloon, and a bank that looked too grand for the settlement it served. She tied her horse outside the bank and walked in to find Huxley Sutton seated behind the desk, as though he owned the place. He did, in every way that mattered. He looked up when she entered, and his thin mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. The man had a habit of pausing before he spoke, as though weighing every word for maximum advantage. Sutton gestured to the chair across from him. Beatrice sat and placed the ledger on the desk.
I found some irregularities in my uncle's loan agreement. The signature looks forged.
Sutton did not blink. He opened the ledger, glanced at the page, and closed it again. The mine owner leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Sutton's voice was calm, almost bored. He always wanted the last word, Beatrice realized. It was a tell, a way of asserting control even when caught in a corner.
I'm not paying a debt based on forged paperwork.
Sutton stood and walked to the window, his back to her. His tone did not change, but Beatrice felt the threat beneath it.
I'll prove it.
Sutton turned and gave her a long, calculating look. He walked past her and opened the door. A dismissal. Beatrice picked up the ledger and left, her pulse hammering. She had called his bluff, but she had no proof beyond her own suspicion and a faint eraser mark. She needed evidence, something concrete that would hold up in front of a judge or a federal marshal. She spent the afternoon in town asking questions, but no one wanted to talk about Huxley Sutton. The shopkeepers looked away when she mentioned his name, and the saloon owner told her to let sleeping dogs lie. By the time she rode back to the ranch, the sun was sinking, and the sky was streaked with red and gold. Caleb was in the corral, working a skittish mare, his movements patient and deliberate. He looked up when she dismounted and walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead.
Any luck in town?
Not the kind I was hoping for. Sutton's got everyone scared.
Men like that usually do.
Beatrice hesitated, then decided to trust him.
I think he forged my uncle's signature to inflate the debt, but I can't prove it.
You need a witness or a document that contradicts his version.
Or a photograph.
Caleb's expression shifted, something sharp and interested.
You're a photographer.
Traveling photographer. I've documented everything from weddings to wanted men. If I can catch Sutton doing something he shouldn't, I can make it stick.
That's dangerous.
So is losing everything I have.
Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then nodded.
All right. I'll help.
Why?
Let's just say, I don't like men who cheat people out of what's theirs.
Beatrice wanted to ask more, but the wall behind his eyes told her he would not answer. She let it go. That night she lay awake in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl across the prairie and the horses shift restlessly in the barn. Dry lightning flickered on the horizon, brief flashes that lit the room and left shadows dancing on the walls. She thought about Caleb Carson and wondered what he was running from or toward. The next day, Beatrice set up her camera near the edge of town, where the road split toward the mine and the claims beyond. She had learned that Sutton made the trip every few days to inspect his operations, and she wanted to see what he did when he thought no one was watching. Caleb came with her, his rifle slung across his saddle and his hat pulled low. They waited in the shade of a cottonwood tree. the only real cover for a mile in any direction. Mid-morning, Sutton rode past with two men Beatrice recognized as his foremen, hard-faced individuals who carried themselves like enforcers. They turned north toward the ridge, and Beatrice followed at a distance, keeping her horse quiet and her profile low. Caleb rode beside her, his gaze sweeping the landscape for trouble. They crested a low rise and saw Sutton's group stopped near an old claim marker, the wooden post leaning at an angle. One of the foremen pulled out a mallet and a new post, and Sutton stood watching as the man drove it into the ground 6 feet west of the original. Beatrice's breath caught. They were moving the boundary marker to steal a strip of someone else's land. She pulled her camera from its case and set it on the tripod, hands moving fast. The exposure would take a few seconds, and she needed them to hold still long enough for the image to set. She framed the shot. Sutton and his men clustered around the false marker and triggered the shutter. The click was faint, but in the stillness it sounded like a gunshot. Sutton's head snapped up, and his eyes locked on the Cottonwood grove. Sutton pointed and shouted something Beatrice could not hear. His men mounted and spurred their horses toward the rise. Beatrice grabbed the camera and collapsed the tripod, her fingers clumsy with panic. Caleb was already moving, pulling her onto her horse and slapping its rump to send it running. They raced back toward the ranch, the sound of hoofbeats pounding behind them. Beatrice clutched the camera case to her chest and prayed the plate had not cracked. Caleb rode beside her, his rifle in one hand and his reins in the other, guiding his horse with his knees. They veered off the main trail and cut through a dry wash, the horses scrambling over loose rock and brush. The foreman followed, closing the gap. Caleb reined in and turned, leveling his rifle.
Keep going. I'll slow them down.
I'm not leaving you.
You have the evidence. Get it to the ranch.
Beatrice wanted to argue, but she saw the set of his jaw and knew he would not budge. She kicked her horse and raced down the wash, the camera bouncing against her ribs. Behind her, she heard the crack of rifle fire. 2 shots close together, then a third. Her heart climbed into her throat, but she did not look back. She reached the ranch and slid off her horse, stumbling into the house. She locked the door and pulled the plate from the camera, holding it up to the light. The image was clear. Sutton and his men standing beside the moved marker, the forged boundary visible in the frame. She had done it. She wrapped the plate in cloth and hid it in the root cellar beneath a sack of potatoes, then went back outside to wait for Caleb. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down like a hand. Beatrice paced the porch, her rifle in her grip, scanning the horizon. Finally, she saw a rider approaching, slumped in the saddle. Her stomach dropped. It was Caleb, but his coat was dark with blood, and his face was pale. She ran to meet him and caught him as he slid off the horse.
Where are you hit?
Shoulder. It's not bad.
It looked bad. Beatrice half carried him into the house and laid him on the table, cutting away his coat and shirt. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone, but tearing muscle. She cleaned the wound with whiskey and stitched it with thread from her sewing kit, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Caleb gritted his teeth and did not make a sound. When she finished, she wrapped his shoulder in clean cloth and stepped back, her hands shaking.
You could have been killed.
But I wasn't. Did you get the plate?
It's safe.
Good. Then it was worth it.
Beatrice looked at him. This man who had walked into her life 3 days ago and taken a bullet for a cause that was not his own.
Why are you really here, Caleb?
He met her eyes, and for a moment she thought he would deflect again. But then his expression softened.
I'm working undercover for the federal government. There's a ring of land fraud operating across the territory, and Sutton's at the center of it. I've been tracking him for 6 months, but I didn't have proof until now.
Why didn't you tell me?
Because if Sutton found out, he'd kill anyone connected to me. I was trying to keep you out of it.
I was already in it the moment I inherited this ranch.
I know that now.
Beatrice sat down beside him, the anger draining out of her.
So what do we do?
We get that plate to the federal marshal in Lincoln. It's a 2-day ride, but it's the only way to make this stick.
Sutton's not going to let us leave.
No, he's not.
That night, Beatrice sat on the porch with her rifle across her knees and watched the shadows shift in the moonlight. Caleb was inside, resting, and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse. The prairie was silent except for the wind and the occasional cry of a night bird. She thought about the photograph hidden in the root cellar and the risk it represented. If Sutton found it, he would destroy it and probably kill them both. But if they could get it to the marshal, they could take him down and save not just her ranch, but dozens of other claims he had stolen. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Caleb standing in the doorway, his arm in a makeshift sling.
Can't sleep?
Not much point in trying.
We'll leave at first light. I'll ride with you as far as the river. Then you go on alone.
Why alone?
Because if Sutton catches us together, he'll know we're working against him. If it's just you, you can claim you're delivering the plate to a customer in Lincoln.
He won't believe that.
Maybe not, but it's better than both of us getting caught.
Beatrice stood and faced him.
I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself again.
It's not a sacrifice. It's a strategy.
It's a stupid strategy.
It's the best one we have.
They stood there in the moonlight, stubborn and exhausted, and Beatrice realized she was not just arguing about tactics. She was arguing because the thought of riding away from him made her chest ache in a way she had not felt in years. She had built her life on independence, on moving from town to town without roots or ties. But Caleb Carson had walked into her failing ranch and made her want to stay.
I'm not leaving you behind.
Beatrice.
No. We do this together, or not at all.
Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then nodded.
All right. Together.
They spent the rest of the night preparing. Beatrice packed the plate in her saddlebag with extra padding, along with food and water for the ride. Caleb checked their weapons and scouted the route they would take, memorizing the places where Sutton's men might set an ambush. At dawn, they mounted and rode out, leaving the ranch hands with instructions to hold the property and send word if Sutton showed up. The ride to the river took most of the day. They kept to the back trails and avoided the main road, but Beatrice felt eyes on them the whole way. Twice, they saw riders in the distance and had to veer into gullies to avoid being spotted. By the time they reached the riverbank, the sun was low and the water was running shallow and slow. Caleb dismounted and scouted the crossing, checking for tracks.
Looks clear. We can ford here and make Lincoln by tomorrow night.
Beatrice slid off her horse and led it to the water's edge. The animal dipped its head and drank, and she let herself breathe for the first time in hours. Then she heard the sound of hoofbeats, and her blood turned to ice. A group of riders emerged from the trees on the far side of the river, 6 men with rifles and Huxley Sutton at their head. He sat his horse like a man who had already won, his expression calm and his eyes cold. Sutton's voice carried across the water. Beatrice's hand went to her saddlebag, but Caleb caught her wrist.
Don't. Not yet.
Sutton walked his horse into the river, the water barely reaching his stirrups. His men fanned out behind him, cutting off any chance of retreat. Sutton's gaze flicked to Caleb. Caleb did not answer, but Beatrice saw the tension in his jaw. Sutton smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Beatrice's heart sank. Sutton knew. He had known all along.
You're the one who should be in prison. You've been stealing land with forged deeds for years.
Sutton stopped his horse in the middle of the river. He gestured, and his men raised their rifles. Beatrice felt Caleb shift beside her, his good hand hovering near his holster.
You shoot us. You'll have federal agents crawling over every claim you own.
Sutton's smile widened. He raised his hand to signal his men. Beatrice closed her eyes and thought about the plate in her saddlebag, the evidence that could bring Sutton down if only they could get it to the marshal. She thought about Caleb, wounded and stubborn, and the ranch she had fought so hard to save. She thought about her uncle, who had tried to hold on to his land and been crushed by a lie. Then she heard a new sound, distant but growing closer. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, coming fast from the west. Sutton turned, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. A line of riders crested the ridge and rode down toward the river, led by a man in a dark suit with a federal badge pinned to his chest. Beatrice recognized him from a photograph she had taken in Omaha. Deputy Marshal Everett Kane, known for cleaning up land fraud cases across the territory. The marshal and his men splashed into the river, surrounding Sutton and his foreman. Kane rode up to Sutton and held out a folded paper. The marshal's voice was flat and hard. Sutton stared at the warrant, his face going pale. Kane gestured to his men. 2 deputies dismounted and pulled Sutton from his horse, binding his wrists. His foreman tried to scatter, but the federal agents were faster, rounding them up and disarming them. Beatrice stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Caleb moved to her side, his expression carefully neutral.
I sent a telegraph from town 2 days ago. Told Kane we had evidence and to ride fast.
You didn't tell me.
I didn't want to get your hopes up in case he didn't make it in time.
Beatrice wanted to be angry, but she was too relieved. She pulled the plate from her saddlebag and handed it to Kane.
This is a photograph of Sutton and his men moving a boundary marker on the Clemson claim. It proves he's been altering property lines.
Kane held the plate up to the fading light and nodded. He looked at Caleb. Caleb's voice was steady. Kane turned back to Sutton, who was still protesting his innocence. Sutton's mouth snapped shut. The deputies led him and his men away, and the riverbank fell quiet. Kane tipped his hat to Beatrice. He and his men rode off, leaving Beatrice and Caleb standing alone by the water. Beatrice turned to Caleb, her hands shaking.
You saved the ranch.
You saved the ranch. I just helped.
We saved it together.
Caleb smiled, a real smile that softened the hard edges of his face.
Yeah, we did.
They stood there for a moment, the river flowing past them and the sun sinking behind the hills. Beatrice felt the weight of the last few days lift, replaced by something lighter and warmer. She looked at Caleb and saw not just a hired hand or a federal agent, but a man who had risked everything to stand beside her.
What happens now?
I have to report to Kane and finish the investigation. It'll take a few weeks to round up the rest of Sutton's network.
And after that?
After that, I was thinking about settling down somewhere. Maybe on a ranch that needs a good foreman.
Beatrice's heart kicked.
I can't pay much.
I'm not asking for much. Just a roof and 3 meals. And maybe the company of a stubborn photographer who doesn't know when to quit.
I might know someone like that.
Caleb stepped closer, his good hand reaching for hers.
Beatrice, I know we've only known each other a few days, but I've spent enough years drifting to recognize when I've found something worth holding on to.
I've spent most of my life moving from town to town, never staying long enough to plant roots. But standing here with you, I don't want to leave.
Then don't.
She looked up at him. This man who had walked into her life at exactly the right moment and refused to walk back out.
I'm not easy to live with. I'm stubborn and independent, and I don't take orders well.
I noticed.
And I'm keeping the ranch in my name.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
Caleb leaned down and kissed her, slow and sure. And Beatrice felt the last of her walls come down. She had spent so long protecting herself, keeping people at arm's length. But Caleb had seen through her defenses and met her stubbornness with his own quiet resolve. She kissed him back, pouring all the fear and relief and hope of the last few days into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set and the first stars were appearing overhead.
We should head back to the ranch.
In a minute.
She held on to him a little longer, her forehead resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time since she had arrived in Cottonwood, Beatrice felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, the town a cluster of lights in the distance. By the time they reached the ranch, it was full dark and the windows glowed with lamplight. The ranch hands came out to meet them, relief plain on their faces. Beatrice told them the story in short bursts, about Sutton's arrest and the photograph that had sealed his fate. The men cheered and clapped Caleb on his good shoulder, and one of them produced a bottle of whiskey that they passed around in celebration. Beatrice sat on the porch steps and watched the stars wheel overhead, feeling the exhaustion finally catch up with her. Caleb sat down beside her, his arm still in the sling, but his color better than it had been that morning.
You going to be all right?
I think so. It's just a lot to take in.
You did something most people wouldn't have the guts to do. You stood up to a man who had everyone else scared, and you won.
We won.
Yeah. We did.
They sat in comfortable silence, the night settling around them. Beatrice thought about the future, about rebuilding the ranch and finding a way to make it profitable. She thought about the cattle drive that would come in the spring and the gamble it represented. She thought about Caleb, who would be there beside her through all of it.
When do you have to leave?
Tomorrow morning. I'll ride to Lincoln with Kane and help him close out the case. Should be back in 2 weeks. Maybe 3.
And then?
Then I'm yours. If you'll have me.
Beatrice looked at him and smiled.
I'll have you.
Caleb kissed her again, softer this time. A promise rather than a claim. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm.
I love you, Beatrice Mackenzie. I know it's fast, but I've learned not to waste time on things that matter.
I love you too. And I'm keeping you to that promise.
You won't have to fight me on it.
They stayed on the porch until the moon rose, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the ranch and the life they would build together. Beatrice felt a lightness she had not known in years, as though the weight of her uncle's debt and Sutton's threats had been lifted and replaced with something bright and unbreakable. The next morning, Beatrice woke early and found Caleb already saddling his horse. She walked out to meet him, the dawn light soft and golden.
Be careful.
Always.
I mean it. Come back to me.
I will. I promise.
He kissed her one last time, then swung into the saddle. Beatrice watched him ride out, her heart full and her eyes dry. She had spent too many years saying goodbye to places and people, but this time was different. This time she knew he was coming back. She turned and walked back into the ranch house, pulling out her camera and setting it on the table. There was work to do, a ranch to rebuild, and a story to tell. She thought about the photographs she had taken of Sutton and his men, the image that had brought a criminal to justice and saved her land. She thought about the power of a single moment captured on film, the way it could tell the truth when words failed. She set up her tripod and angled it toward the window, framing the view of the prairie and the endless sky. Then, she triggered the shutter and let the light do its work. 2 weeks later, Caleb rode back into the ranch at sunset, his arm out of the sling and his face tanned from the road. Beatrice ran out to meet him, and he caught her in his good arm, lifting her off the ground.
Told you I'd come back.
I never doubted it.
Liar.
Maybe a little.
He set her down, and they walked into the house together, their fingers laced. The ranch hands had cleaned the place up and made repairs while he was gone, and the herd had grown by a dozen head thanks to a trade Beatrice had negotiated with a passing drover. The ledger was balanced, and the forged debt erased from the books. Caleb looked around and nodded.
You've been busy.
I had a lot of time to think, and a lot of reasons to make this place work.
I'm one of those reasons, I hope.
The main one.
They spent the evening sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie and talking about the future. Caleb told her about the rest of Sutton's network, how the federal agents had arrested a dozen more men involved in the land fraud scheme and recovered deeds for over 50 properties. The claims would be returned to their rightful owners, and the territory would see a reckoning that had been years in the making.
Did Sutton say anything?
Not much. He's going to prison for a long time, and he knows it.
Good.
Kane said you should testify at the trial. Your photograph is the key piece of evidence.
I'll be there.
Caleb reached for her hand and held it, his thumb brushing over her knuckles.
I've been thinking about what comes next. After the trial, after everything settles,
And?
I want to marry you.
Beatrice's breath caught. She looked at him, this man who had fought beside her and believed in her when no one else would.
That was fast.
Like I said, I don't waste time on things that matter.
I don't need a big wedding. Just you and me, and a preacher.
That's all I need too.
Then yes. I'll marry you.
Caleb pulled her close and kissed her, and Beatrice felt the last piece of her life fall into place. She had come to Cottonwood expecting to lose everything, and found instead a home, a purpose, and a love that refused to be anything less than whole. They were married a week later in the small church at the edge of town, with the ranch hands as witnesses and the preacher reading from a worn Bible. Beatrice wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Caleb wore his best coat with the Confederate patch finely removed. They spoke their vows and quiet voices, promising to stand together through whatever came next. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in applause. Afterward, they rode back to the ranch and celebrated with a meal the hands had prepared: roasted beef and potatoes and bread still warm from the oven. The sun set and the stars came out, and Beatrice sat beside her husband and felt a contentment she had never known.
What are you thinking about?
How different everything is from a month ago.
Better or worse?
Better. So much better.
Caleb kissed her temple and wrapped an arm around her shoulders.
We're going to build something good here.
We already have.
They stayed on the porch until late, talking and laughing and making plans for the ranch. Beatrice thought about the cattle drive they would organize in the spring, the way they would expand the herd and repair the fences, and turn the failing property into something profitable. She thought about the photographs she would take, capturing the life they were building and the land they were learning to love. The trial took place in Lincoln 3 months later. Beatrice traveled to the Capitol with Caleb and testified in front of a packed courtroom, describing how she had discovered the forged loan and taken the photograph that proved Sutton's crimes. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, questioning her motives and her skills as a photographer. But the evidence was undeniable. The plate showed Sutton and his men moving the boundary marker, and the forged signature in the ledger matched samples taken from other fraudulent deeds. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Sutton was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and his assets were seized and distributed to the victims of his fraud. Beatrice's ranch was cleared of all debt, and the title was transferred solely into her name. She walked out of the courthouse with Caleb at her side, feeling lighter than she had in years.
It's over.
It's over.
What do we do now?
We go home.
They rode back to Cottonwood together, stopping at the river where they had faced Sutton and his men. The water was higher now, fed by spring rains, and the cottonwood trees were thick with new leaves. Beatrice dismounted and walked to the bank, looking out at the place where everything had changed. Caleb came up beside her and took her hand.
This is where it all started.
No. It started the day you walked into my ranch looking for work.
Fair point.
I'm glad you stayed.
Me too.
They stood there for a long moment, the river flowing past them and the prairie stretching out in every direction. Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought them to this place, the fear and the danger, and the moments when it had seemed like everything would fall apart. She thought about the photograph that had saved her ranch, and the man who had stood beside her when no one else would.
Do you ever regret it? Giving up the undercover work?
Not for a second. I spent years chasing criminals and sleeping with one eye open. This is better.
Even with a stubborn wife who doesn't take orders?
Especially with a stubborn wife who doesn't take orders.
Beatrice laughed and leaned into him, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the solid presence of her husband at her side.
I love you, Caleb Carson.
I love you too, Beatrice Carson.
They mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, the town of Cottonwood visible in the distance. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and beautiful, and Beatrice felt a sense of belonging she had never known. This was her home now. Her land, her life, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ranch thrived over the next year. Beatrice and Caleb worked side by side, repairing fences and expanding the herd and building a life together. She continued her photography, documenting the settlers who passed through Cottonwood and the changing landscape of the prairie. Caleb managed the cattle and trained new ranch hands, his steady presence an anchor for the operation. They were a team, balanced and strong, and everyone who met them could see the bond between them. One evening in late summer, Beatrice stood on the porch and watched the sun set over the land she had fought so hard to keep. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder.
What are you thinking about?
How lucky I am.
Funny. I was thinking the same thing.
Beatrice turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and deep, and felt the love between them settle into something solid and permanent. This was not a fairy tale or a fantasy. It was real, messy, beautiful life, and she would not trade it for anything. The following spring, they organized their first cattle drive, herding 200 head north to the railhead. It was hard, dirty work, but Beatrice loved every moment of it. She rode beside Caleb in the ranch hands, her camera packed safely in her saddlebag, capturing images of the journey. When they reached the railhead and sold the herd, the profit was more than enough to carry them through the winter and invest in new stock. They rode back to Cottonwood with money in their pockets and hope in their hearts.
We did it.
We did.
What's next?
More of the same. Build the ranch, take photographs, raise cattle, maybe start a family.
I like the sound of that.
Me too.
They rode into town and stopped at the bank, the same building where Beatrice had confronted Sutton over a year earlier. The new banker, a fair man appointed by the federal government, greeted them warmly and helped them deposit their earnings. Beatrice looked around the office and felt a quiet satisfaction. This was her victory, her home, her future. That evening, they returned to the ranch and found the hands had prepared a celebration. There was music and dancing and food enough for everyone, and Beatrice stood in the center of it all and felt a gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Caleb pulled her into a dance, spinning her around the yard while the stars came out overhead.
Happy? I see you're warned and undresting she were tans out for some time, compared to less at the time. The war the wind stas but that 4 year in love corns. There were their love place with a lust lots mark again.
Happier than I ever thought possible.
Good. Because I plan to keep you that way for the rest of our lives.
I'm holding you to that.
They danced until the fire burned low and the music faded, and then they walked back to the house hand in hand. Beatrice paused at the door and looked back at the ranch, the place that had tested her and shaped her, and given her everything she had never known she needed.
Thank you.
For what?
For walking into my life when I needed you most. For standing beside me. For loving me.
That's the easiest thing I've ever done.
Beatrice smiled and led him inside, closing the door behind them. Outside, the prairie stretched out under the stars, vast and beautiful in theirs. They woke early the next morning to the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the familiar creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. Beatrice dressed quickly and met Caleb in the kitchen, where he was already brewing coffee on the stove. He poured her a cup and kissed her cheek, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise through the window.
The fence in the north pasture needs mending.
I saw that yesterday. We should take care of it before the afternoon heat.
Agreed. I'll get the tools.
They worked side by side for hours, replacing broken posts and stringing new wire. It was hot, exhausting work, But Beatrice found satisfaction in the rhythm of it, the way her body moved in tandem with Caleb's. They had become a single unit, anticipating each other's needs and working without the need for constant communication. By midday, the fence was repaired, and they returned to the house to wash up and eat. That afternoon, a wagon rolled up the drive, and Beatrice recognized the driver as one of the settlers she had photographed months earlier. The woman climbed down with a baby on her hip and a wide smile on her face. The settler told them she had come to thank Beatrice for the photograph, which had helped her family secure a loan to expand their homestead. She pressed a jar of preserves into Beatrice's hands and insisted they visit whenever they had time. Beatrice accepted the gift and promised they would, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at the thought of the community they were building. After the woman left, Caleb came up behind Beatrice and wrapped his arms around her waist.
You're making a difference here.
We're making a difference.
Fair enough.
They spent the rest of the afternoon tending to the horses and checking the cattle. Beatrice took her camera out and captured images of the ranch, the animals, the landscape she had come to love. When the sun began to set, they sat on the porch and watched the sky turn gold and pink, the air cooling and the crickets starting their evening song.
Do you ever think about the future? What we'll be doing in 10 years?
All the time. I see us here, with a bigger herd and a few kids running around. Maybe we'll add on to the house, build a proper barn.
I like that vision.
What do you see?
The same. A life where we're building something together, where we're partners in everything.
That's what we have now.
I know. And I never want to lose it.
Caleb reached for her hand and held it, his grip firm and reassuring.
You won't. I promise you that.
They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking about their plans and their dreams. Beatrice felt a contentment settle over her, a sense that she was exactly where she belonged. The months since she had arrived in Cottonwood had been the hardest of her life, but they had also been the most rewarding. She had fought for her land and her future, and she had won. The following week, they rode into town to pick up supplies and check on the progress of the new schoolhouse being built near the church. The town was growing, with new families arriving every month, and businesses opening along the main street. Beatrice stopped at the general store and bought fabric for new curtains, and Caleb picked up nails and tools for repairs around the ranch. They ran into Marshall Kane outside the saloon, and he tipped his hat to them with a grin. Kane told them that Sutton's old mine had been sold to a group of investors from Denver who were running it properly and paying fair wages. The workers who had been exploited under Sutton's management were finally getting the treatment they deserved, and the town was thriving as a result. Beatrice felt a surge of pride at the thought that her actions had contributed to that change. On the ride back to the ranch, Caleb pointed out a hawk circling overhead, and Beatrice watched it soar against the blue sky.
I used to think freedom meant being alone, not depending on anyone.
And now?
Now I know it means choosing the right person to stand beside.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
They arrived home as the sun was setting, and the ranch hands greeted them with news that one of the cows had given birth to a healthy calf. Beatrice went to the barn to see the new arrival, and Caleb followed, leaning against the stall door while she knelt beside the calf and ran her hand over its soft fur.
Look at that. A new beginning.
Seems fitting.
It does.
They stayed in the barn until dark, talking about the calf and the herd and the plans they had for the coming year. When they finally walked back to the house, the stars were bright overhead, and the prairie was quiet, except for the distant howl of a coyote. Beatrice paused at the door and looked out at the land one more time, feeling a gratitude so deep It filled her chest.
Thank you for believing in me.
Always.
They went inside and closed the door, and Beatrice knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The life they were building was not perfect, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. The weeks turned into months, and the ranch continued to flourish. Beatrice and Caleb settled into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Their days filled with work, and their evenings spent together on the porch or by the fire. They hired 2 more hands to help with the growing herd, and Beatrice taught them the basics of ranching, while Caleb handled the more complex training. She also began offering photography services to the settlers passing through Cottonwood, capturing portraits and landscapes that documented the changing face of the prairie. One afternoon in early autumn, a rider came to the ranch with a telegram from Denver. Beatrice read it quickly, and then looked up at Caleb with surprise.
It's from a newspaper editor. He wants to buy some of my photographs for a series on frontier life.
That's incredible.
He's offering good money, too. Enough to help us through the winter and then some.
You should do it.
I will. But I want to make sure the ranch comes first.
The ranch will be fine. This is your work, Beatrice. Don't put it aside.
She sent a reply agreeing to the terms, and within a few weeks she received payment along with a request for more images. The editor praised her eye for detail and her ability to capture the spirit of the West, and Beatrice felt a pride that rivaled the satisfaction of a successful cattle drive. She continued to balance her photography with ranch work, often riding out at dawn to capture the light, or staying late to document the evening roundup. Caleb supported her completely, never questioning her choices or asking her to sacrifice her passion for the sake of the ranch. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Beatrice leaned against him and closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the flames and the steady beat of his heart.
I never thought I could have this. A home, a partner, work that I love.
You deserve all of it.
So do you.
I know, and I'm grateful every day.
They stayed by the fire until late, talking about everything and nothing. And when they finally went to bed, Beatrice felt a peace that went deeper than words. The next morning they woke to the first frost of the season, the prairie sparkling with ice crystals in the early light. Caleb went out to check on the cattle while Beatrice started breakfast, and when he returned, his cheeks were red from the cold, and his breath came out in clouds.
Winter's coming early this year.
We'll be ready.
I know. We will.
They spent the day preparing for the colder months, repairing the barn roof and stocking up on feed and supplies. The ranch hands worked alongside them, and by evening, they had everything secured. Beatrice stood in the yard and looked around at the result of their labor, feeling a satisfaction that came from knowing they were prepared for whatever lay ahead. That night, they invited the hands to join them for dinner, and the house filled with laughter and conversation. Beatrice served stew and bread, and Caleb poured whiskey for everyone. They toasted to the ranch and to the coming winter, and Beatrice felt a sense of family that she had never experienced before. These people were not just employees. They were part of something larger, a community built on trust and hard work. After everyone left, Beatrice and Caleb cleaned up together, washing dishes and banking the fire. They moved in comfortable silence, each knowing what the other needed without having to ask. When they finished, Caleb pulled her into his arms and kissed her, slow and deep.
I love you.
I love you too.
They went to bed and lay together in the darkness, listening to the wind outside and the creak of the house settling. Beatrice rested her head on Caleb's chest and felt his hand stroke her hair. And she knew that this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who would stand with you through it all. The winter was harsh, with snowstorms that lasted for days, and temperatures that dropped below freezing. But the ranch survived, and Beatrice and Caleb grew even closer during the long, dark months. They spent their evenings by the fire, reading and talking and planning for the spring. Beatrice worked on her photographs, developing plates in the makeshift darkroom she had set up in the storage shed, while Caleb carved wooden tools and repaired tack. When spring finally arrived, the prairie came alive with color and sound. Wildflowers bloomed across the grassland, and the cattle grazed contentedly in the pastures. Beatrice and Caleb organized another cattle drive, this one even larger than the first, and they spent weeks on the trail, pushing the herd north. It was exhausting work, but Beatrice loved every moment of it. The open sky and the rhythm of the horses, and the camaraderie of the drive. When they reached the railhead and sold the herd, the profit was enough to expand the ranch and buy more land. They rode back to Cottonwood with their heads high and their hearts full, knowing they had built something that would last.
We're going to make it.
I never doubted it.
Not even at the beginning?
Okay, maybe a little, but not anymore.
They arrived home to find that one of the ranch hands had planted a garden near the house, and the first shoots of vegetables were already pushing through the soil. Beatrice knelt beside the rows and ran her fingers over the tender leaves, feeling a joy that went beyond words. This was her land, her home, her life, and she was living it exactly the way she wanted. That evening they walked down to the riverbank, the same place where they had stood together the year before. The water flowed gently, reflecting the colors of the sunset, and the cottonwood trees rustled in the breeze. Beatrice took Caleb's hand and looked out at the prairie, the town of Cottonwood visible in the distance.
Do you remember the first time we came here?
I do. You told me you didn't need anyone.
I was wrong.
You were scared.
Maybe. But I'm not anymore.
Caleb pulled her close and kissed her forehead, and they stood together in the fading light, the world around them quiet and still. Beatrice felt a gratitude that filled her completely, a sense that everything she had endured had led her to this moment. She thought about the photograph that had saved her ranch, the man who had stood beside her, the life they had built together. And she knew that whatever came next, they would face it hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. This was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something even greater. A life built on love and trust, and the unshakable belief that together they could overcome anything. As summer returned to the prairie, Beatrice received word that the newspaper editor in Denver wanted to feature her work in a larger publication, one that would reach readers across the country. The offer included a contract for regular contributions and a stipend that would provide steady income alongside the ranch profits. She discussed it with Caleb that evening, spreading the letter out on the kitchen table while he read it carefully.
This is a real opportunity. You should take it.
It means traveling to Denver occasionally for meetings.
We can manage that. The hands are good workers, and I can handle things while you're gone.
Are you sure?
Absolutely. This is your dream, Beatrice. Don't let it slip away because you're worried about the ranch.
She signed the contract and mailed it back the next day, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The first trip to Denver came a month later, and Caleb rode with her to the station in Cottonwood, carrying her bag and walking her to the platform.
Be safe. And don't let those city folks talk down to you.
I won't. I'll be back in a week.
I'll be counting the days.
The train pulled away, and Beatrice watched Caleb grow smaller in the distance. A sudden loneliness settling over her despite the adventure ahead. Denver was overwhelming at first, with its crowded streets and tall buildings. But the editor welcomed her warmly and praised her work with genuine enthusiasm. She spent days meeting with publishers and photographers, discussing techniques and sharing stories of life on the prairie. By the time she boarded the train home, she felt energized and proud, her portfolio heavier with new contacts and opportunities. Caleb was waiting at the station when she arrived, his face breaking into a wide grin the moment he saw her. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her hard, and Beatrice laughed against his mouth.
Missed you.
Missed you too.
How was it?
Incredible. They loved the work. I have assignments lined up for the next 6 months.
That's my girl.
They rode back to the ranch together, and Beatrice told him everything about the trip, the people she had met, the buildings she had photographed, the energy of the city. Caleb listened with genuine interest, asking questions and encouraging her to pursue every opportunity. When they reached home, the ranch looked exactly as she had left it. The cattle grazing peacefully, and the house standing solid against the sky. She realized then that no matter how far she traveled, this place would always be her anchor. The following months brought a steady rhythm of work and travel. Beatrice made several more trips to Denver, each time returning with new assignments and growing recognition for her photography. Her images appeared in magazines and newspapers, capturing the attention of readers who had never set foot on the prairie, but were captivated by her vision of the West. Caleb remained her steadfast supporter, managing the ranch with quiet competence and welcoming her home each time with open arms. One autumn evening, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the prairie, the air cool and crisp with the promise of winter. Beatrice leaned against Caleb and felt his arms settle around her shoulders.
Do you ever regret staying here? Choosing this life?
Not for a second.
Even when I'm gone?
Even then. Because I know you'll always come back.
Always.
That's all I need.
They sat in silence for a while, the sky turning deep purple and the first stars appearing overhead. Beatrice thought about how far they had come, from the desperate days of fighting Sutton to the stability and success they enjoyed now. She thought about the community they had helped build, the people they had supported, the life they had created together.
I want to marry you.
Caleb turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his face, before it softened into a smile.
Is that a proposal?
Yes.
Then, I accept.
He kissed her slowly, his hand cupping her face, and Beatrice felt a rush of joy so intense it made her dizzy. They had been partners in every way that mattered, but this felt like the final piece falling into place. A commitment spoken aloud and witnessed by the prairie itself. They were married a month later in a small ceremony at the church in Cottonwood, with Marshal Kane and a handful of settlers in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and a tie he borrowed from one of the hands. The preacher spoke briefly about love and partnership, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Beatrice with such tenderness that she felt tears prick her eyes. They celebrated at the ranch that evening, hosting a barbecue for the hands and the neighbors who had become friends. Someone brought a fiddle and played music while people danced in the yard, and Beatrice and Caleb joined in, laughing and spinning under the stars. When the last guest left and the fire burned low, they walked hand in hand to the riverbank, the same place where they had stood so many times before. The water flowed gently, reflecting the moonlight, and the cottonwood trees whispered in the breeze.
Mrs. Carson.
I like the sound of that.
So do I.
Beatrice looked out at the prairie, the land she had fought for and the life she had built, and felt a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from her very core. She had come to Cottonwood alone and uncertain, carrying the weight of debt and doubt. But she had found something here that she never expected. Love. Purpose. Home. And standing beside her was the man who had believed in her from the beginning, who had fought with her and for her, who had shown her that strength did not mean standing alone.
I love you.
I love you too. Forever.
They stood together in the moonlight, the town of Cottonwood glowing faintly in the distance, and Beatrice knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. This was their life, their land, their love, and it was everything she had ever wanted.